What's up, everybody? It's Corey, host of the Grease Pole Podcast. Wanted to bring you a preview of the Divisional Round matchup between the Birds and the New York Giants. And it's funny because we launched the YouTube page to accompany the podcast in October of 21. And since now we let a 7 seed in the playoffs, we were in the playoffs last year. I don't know why the fuck it didn't occur to me to do this last year, but better late than never, I guess. So you can do more on YouTube than just podcast episodes, come to find out. So anyway, wanted to kind of take a minute or two to break down this matchup. We're going to see the Giants for the third time this year. It's very hard to beat a team 3 times, right? Very hard. Mazel tov to San Francisco, who did it to Seattle this past weekend in the wild card, but now it's our turn with the Giants. And it's a rivalry game. They just beat Minnesota. I guess you could call that an upset, even though it's Minnesota and Kirk Cousins, but only motherfucker in the world that'll throw a 3-yard out route on a 4th and 8. So, yeah, the team that beat them is who we play now. So let's go ahead and break this down. The way I wanted to do it was kind of look at the matchups and look at when we're on offense first and then when we're on defense. It's an Eagles pod, but I tried to be impartial here, okay? I didn't want to be a homer if there's any Giants fans that watch. So there's that. And let's get into it. Again, we're going to start with the Eagles on offense here. And let's take a look at the quarterback, Jalen Hurts. And look, you know the backstory, right? Despite missing 2 games, QB1 was named a second-team All-Pro. He's very much entrenched in that MVP conversation. And the Giants are coming off Wild Card weekend where they held Justin Jefferson to 47 yards in the wild card, and they do have a solid but not spectacular secondary with Adoree Jackson, Xavier McKinney, and Julian Love, but it all comes down to the shoulder of Jalen Hurts, and if it's 100%, which is reportedly the case, right? Allegedly, he's off the injury report, not up there, supposedly completely good to go now. It's worth mentioning that when he was fully healthy in Week 14, he went 21 of 31 for 217 yards and 2 touchdowns and added another 7 carries for 77 yards and a touchdown on the ground. And look for Hurts to return to his usual self running the ball this week. In Week 18, whenever he'd run, he'd go down 2 to 3 yards before contact, which was an act of self-preservation to ensure his health in the playoffs, but now it is the fucking playoffs. So the smart move by Sirianni and Shane Steichen would be to lean on the passing game and only have Hurts run a handful of times. I'd expect to see more from Hurts this week, given the competitor he is and having a playoff-sized chip on his shoulder after being bounced by Tampa last year in the wild card. This is a guy that's been on a quest to prove people wrong all season long, and his next opportunity, it comes right now, Saturday night, with the season on the line. Running backs and receivers, skilled positions, quote unquote, which is so offensive if you've ever played offensive or defensive line. Miles Sanders broke 1,000 yards and double-digit touchdowns for the first time in his NFL career, but as we've discussed here on the channel, the last few weeks haven't seen 26 at his best. He had a couple fumbles, drop passes, and the guy that followed Saquon Barkley in Penn State's backfield simply has to be better than that in the playoffs. Week 14, Sanders averaged 8.5 yards per carry on 17 carries for 144 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also, don't forget about Baby Yoda, Boston Scott, the giant killer, right? For whatever reason, his little ass always shows up and balls out against Big Blue. He's got 10 touchdowns in 8 career games against the Giants, which is more than he's got against the other 30 teams combined. I don't know if Sirianni is fully aware of this. I'd assume so, but expect to see 35 make a handful of appearances in this one. On the perimeter, the Birds have their best tandem of receivers in franchise history. Both A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith set franchise records this year. It was also the first time in team history that a pair of wide receivers both had over 1,000 yards receiving in the same season. The acquisition of A.J. Brown has helped Devontae Smith show exactly why Howie Roseman moved up in last year's draft to get him, and both guys' skill sets complement each other perfectly, right? Dallas Goedert, tight end, was having a career year prior to an injury against Washington on Monday night in Week 10, but he's back and clearly already at 100%. He's been at 100%. And 88 adds a different dimension to this offense. You've got weapons all over the field, but you're facing a Wink Martindale defense, so you know pressure's coming. Hurts is going to have to get the ball out quickly. A.J. Brown on a quick slant. Devontae Smith on a bubble screen. The Giants do have active linebackers that will try to make life difficult for Dallas Goedert across the middle of the field. And, this secondary struggled to contain A.J. and Devontae in Jersey in Week 14. So, on paper, and again, if Hurts' shoulder doesn't make another appearance, if it doesn't flare up, I think the advantage on the ground goes to the Birds by virtue of the offensive line. And I'm going to go with a push in the passing game just because we haven't seen Hurts back entirely healthy yet. All right? You don't know if he's going to be 100%. They say he's going to be 100%. But let's see how things look first. Let's go to the trenches, right? Where the real men are. All 5 starters along the Eagles' offensive line are Pro Bowlers, whatever the hell that even means now, okay? Jason Kelce, Lane Johnson are first-team All-Pros, and it's been the best O-line in the NFL all season long. There's nothing that Nick Sirianni and Shane Steichen can't do with this group of guys. But on the flip side, the Giants' D-line is pretty damn good too. Dexter Lawrence is an All-Pro, and he just destroyed Garrett Bradbury of Minnesota in the wild card game. 8 pressures for Lawrence against the Vikings and 7 by Leonard Williams in last Sunday's game. So you've also got the 5th overall pick in this year's draft, Kayvon Thibodeau, on the edge as well. You got Ojulari with a quad injury. Will he be ready to go? As we said, Giants defensive coordinator Wink Martindale is known for bringing the heat and sending guys. So Landon Dickerson and Isaac Seumalo will have to be mindful of guys shooting the gaps. And ultimately, this is going to be where the game is won and lost, which I guess you can really say about any football game. But it's a strength against strength. And given that the Eagles have had the best O-line in football all year, and again, no disrespect intended, have faced better edge rushers than the Giants, advantage Eagles in the trenches when the Birds are on offense. Let's go to the defensive side of the ball. Daniel Jones, Danny Dimes. Like Josh Allen in Buffalo, head coach Brian Dable has, without question, improved Daniel Jones' game. And it's funny because he's a guy that your fantasy league group chat would clown in years past, but motherfucker's evolved into a respectable NFL quarterback that's due to get paid after the Giants declined his 5th-year option. And that's coming this offseason, whether he re-signs with the Giants or, hits free agency. But he's far more mobile than he's given credit for. He finished the regular season with 708 yards on the ground. And really think about this, right? Jalen Hurts is thought of as this incredibly effective, true dual threat quarterback. He finished with 760 rushing yards. That's only, and I suck at math, I had the calculator, only 52 more yards than Daniel Jones, okay? So that's a guy that can do both as well, and he's managed to do so while working to limit the turnovers that he had become, pretty well known for. So if you look at last Sunday against Minnesota, Jones played probably the best game of his NFL career, turning the ball over 0 times in the biggest game of his life to that point. And that said, the Eagles' defense is significantly better than Minnesota's and certainly more opportunistic. This is a Giant offense that in the past it used to feature heavy doses of Saquon Barkley, and it was Daniel Jones' job just to not fuck it up, be the game manager. But now Daniel Jones is the focal point of this offense, and he's earned it. I'm still going to go advantage Eagles here by virtue of the trenches. Again, pass rush, came within 1 sack of tying the 84 Bears for the all-time record, right? So this Eagles defense, even in this era, came close to breaking a record that was set back in the mid-'80s when you were allowed to still beat the fuck out of quarterbacks. So, and again, I like Daniel Jones. He's had a really good year. Not historic, though. The Eagles D-line has advantage Birds. Backs and receivers. Skilled positions. Saquon Barkley's a grown-ass man. And if I'm Brian Dable, and shout out to former Eagles quarterback Mike Kafka, Giants offensive coordinator, I'm running Barkley like Dave Wanstead used Ricky Williams down in Miami, as long as the game allows it. he can do it all, Saquon Barkley, and he did against Minnesota, but with respect to the Vikings defensive coordinator, Ed Donatel, that defense is aging and predictable, okay? Saquon will have a tougher go at things against the Birds, but at the same time, we've seen this defense get the ball pounded down their fucking throats this season. You look on the perimeter, and look, the Giants have a skeleton crew out there at wide receiver, right? The days of OBJ and Victor Cruz are well in the rear view, and what you've got now is an overpaid and underproductive Kenny Golladay, Darius Slayton, Isaiah Hodgins, and something called Richie James. Sterling Shepard's on IR. Stop me if you've heard that before. But credit Brian Dable and his staff, along with Daniel Jones, as they've gotten everything they can from this group of receivers. It's kind of like a tube of toothpaste, right? Where you squeeze every little bit you can out of it, and eventually you're just not going to get anything else out of the motherfucker. So we've kind of seen the ceiling with this Giants receiving core, but it's been a generation since the Birds have had a pair of corners like Darius Slay and James Bradbury, who's going to have a huge chip on his shoulder in this game against his former team in the playoffs after they did him dirty. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson returned last week, week 18, or 2 weeks ago rather, and had 7 tackles and looked like his usual self. This is a guy that, even after missing 6 games, still finished tied for the league lead in interceptions. After missing 6 fucking games. So, games aren't played on paper, obviously, right? But you have, on the outside, you've got a significant gap in talent. And if you're the Giants, I think while Daniel Jones is in command of this offense now very much, you're hoping to keep this game close so you're not forced to completely abandon Saquon Barkley. I'm going to give the Giants the advantage on the road, and in the passing game, Daniel Jones through the air. I'm going to go advantage Eagles here based off the secondary and based off of the fact that, again, the edge rushers, that rotation, you're going to be able to get after Daniel Jones a couple times more than likely. You're going to be able to rush his decision-making, which Minnesota did not. Let's go to the trenches when the Giants have the ball. The Giants' offensive line has improved a shit ton, and even though Giants fans are happy as fuck to see Dave Gettleman gone, Andrew Thomas has developed into a good player. So you've got him and this year's 7th overall pick, Evan Neal, as the bookends to protect Daniel Jones. And you're finally seeing the investment of premium draft capital up front pay dividends for New York. Again, that said, the Eagles' pass rush proved to be too much for the Giants to handle in Week 14. Week 18, not so much, somehow with Davis Webb under center, but for all the love Jalen Hurts gets, the Birds' pass rush has been the most consistent group on this team all year long that you can rely on to show up week in and week out. Not to mention, the front four, Jonathan Gannon's going to heavily rotate them in this game, as he always does, and probably more so this game considering it's a playoffs. For one, you got Josh Sweat coming back off an injury, right? Jordan Davis has spent a portion of this year banged up and was used fairly conservatively down the stretch, specifically, I believe, for spots like this one against the Giants, where you need that dude. You moved up to get him. He's a big investment. This is the spot you want him to wreak havoc in. The Giants' O-line is good, okay? But with the depth up front for the Eagles, that shit's hard to deal with. And not just on the edge with Sweat back, but especially on the interior for the Giants guards, Nick Gates, Mark Lewinsky. When you've got guys like Sweat, Hassan Reddick, Brandon Graham, Javon Hargrave, and even Fletcher Cox, even though he's getting up there, when you've got all these guys that can rotate and stay fresh for a full 60 minutes, it makes life difficult for your offense to flow when your quarterback starts to hear footsteps on a regular basis. And this is, for the first time since the Jim Johnson era, the Eagles' defense manages to complement itself very well. And the trenches were a big reason why Super Bowl 52 happened, and this team, this defense, is very much built the same way. Advantage Eagles. So, realistically, Week 14 and Week 18 don't really matter here, but you use them as a reference point, right? You have to. And it's cliche, but the playoffs are different, and everything's got a little more juice. There's a little more urgency. And as Eagles fans, we hope the Giants' ceiling happened last week. Right? But don't get it twisted. Coach Sirianni and the entire organization, from the players to the front office know there's going to be a fucking shitstorm if this game doesn't go a certain way. But the reality is this isn't the same Giants team that we've seen the last few years. So the Eagles have to force Daniel Jones to make those mistakes like he has in previous years, and they have to know that their advantage lies in the trenches. I don't see this game as a blowout. I think it's tight, and I think Hurts getting his feet back under him also comes into play here. But ultimately, give me the Birds 27-21 over the Giants. And moving on to the NFC Championship. At least that's the official Grease Poll prediction. And that, if true, knock on wood, would leave it to where now we're facing San Francisco or Dallas. So who would you rather face in the NFC Championship? San Francisco or the Antichrist, Dallas Cowboys? What are your thoughts on facing the Giants for the third time this year? What's your thoughts on this matchup? Give us your thoughts in the comment section below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for plenty of Eagles playoff content and even more coming your way as free agency and the draft approach. Also, don't forget you can listen to the flagship, the Grease Poll Podcast, each and every Monday, where new episodes can not only be found here, but on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well, and wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. We'll see you next time. Enjoy Saturday night. As always, go Birds.